Welcome back to Understanding Laudato Si. In the last episode, we took a look at three different categories, three models of approaching the question of what is creation and what is humanity's role in relationship to or within the rest of creation. We took a look at the dominion model, the stewardship model, and the kinship or community of creation model. In this episode of Understanding Laudato Si, we're going to look at the text itself. First, by taking a look back at these three models and trying to understand in a kind of an anticipatory way, a way of sort of framing our approach to reading the text, how we might classify Pope Francis's encyclical letter. Does it fit under the dominion model or the stewardship model or the kinship model of creation? Then we'll take a look at what Pope Francis says at the outset of the encyclical, how he lays out his audience, how he introduces his mission, his appeal, his theme, and kind of sets the tone for what's to follow. So about this question, which of the three models that we've looked at in terms of the Christian understanding of creation does Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si fit? It's definitely not the dominion model. Pope Francis is clear and writes in the text itself that this is not an authentic or accurate way from the Christian vantage point, from the Catholic Church's perspective, to read the book of Genesis or to understand our relationship to the rest of creation. So Pope Francis's encyclical is not an iteration or an example of the dominion model of creation. But there's an interesting kind of juxtaposition we have here. As we'll see when we go more deeply into the text itself, there are times in which Pope Francis uses the language of the kinship model of creation, that third way or view, or category for understanding creation and humanity's relationship to it. Language like Sister Earth or Mother Earth, language like the intrinsic value of all of creation apart from humanity, that God has a relationship to the rest of the created order. These kinds of things appear periodically. Yet on the other hand, we'll also see how he uses and adopts the language of the stewardship model of creation. He reinterprets what is oftentimes seen in the dominion approach as kind of this absolute sovereignty bestowed to you and me in the book of Genesis in terms of dominion and subduing the earth and that sort of thing. And he says, no. What Genesis is really calling for is our care for creation, that we are entrusted with this vocation, this calling to take care of this earth, to till it, to cultivate it, to protect it, and so on. So what I'm going to suggest is that Pope Francis, in fact, doesn't fit comfortably in terms of the encyclical in either the stewardship model or the kinship model of creation. Instead, what Pope Francis is teaching on the environment and humanity's relationship within it, where that really falls is somewhere in between. It's kind of a liminal or a intermediary position. It is both, we might say, if he had two legs standing, it'd be one in the stewardship camp, one in the kinship camp. And I think there's a very practical reason for that. And I'll give it to you right off the bat, right from the get-go. And that's just like with St. Francis of Assisi, the way in which he's been placed in the garden is in a bird bath depicted that way, or been overly romanticized in terms of paintings and poetry and music. I think that Pope Francis and his advisors realize that if he were to embrace fully or to talk in language that is very evocative of the kinship model of creation, and that means emphasizing our shared relationship with the rest of creation, our createdness as the kind of starting point for our reflection, then he runs the risk of people dismissing him. He runs the risk of people dismissing Laudato Si in whole and not actually heeding the call for actual, concrete, practical change. So it's a practical move, at least that's my interpretation, that's my suspicion, because if he didn't understand our relationship to the rest of creation in terms of kinship, then he wouldn't hold up Francis of Assisi as often as he does, and he wouldn't adopt the language from the Franciscan tradition of kinship, of relationality, of intrinsic value for all of creation. So there is a both and going on here, which is a great Catholic theme. We are both and people. It's not either or. Jesus Christ is not either God or human, but fully divine and fully human. In the same way, the encyclical Laudato Si is not either in the stewardship camp or the kinship camp, but is sort of a both and, a little bit of each. at the end of the encyclical itself, if we look at what Pope Francis calls for in terms of concrete action, political engagement, and the language that he adopts to articulate that, we have to say that he probably would feel most comfortable identifying his approach as relating to the stewardship model. That's the primary language that's adopted, but we see these glimpses of kinship throughout nonetheless. What does he do? How does he open this text? What's important about that? Well, in the preface material or introduction, he says first and foremost that St. Francis of Assisi is his guide. He says that he is the paradigmatic, he is the model for what it means to have a healthy relationship to the rest of creation, how human beings are to relate to the earth. If we were to look throughout all of Christian history at the best example of somebody who does this, it is Francis of Assisi. And it's from Francis of Assisi that, as we already saw, he takes the name Laudato Si from his Canticle of the Creatures, but he also points to other ways in which Francis of Assisi identifies aspects of creation in a kinship sort of mode or a model. He says, for example, that our earth is, as Francis of Assisi puts it, like our sister and mother. Our sister who cares for us, our mother who looks over us and provides for us. And one of the things that's very startling right from the get-go, right in the first paragraphs, is that Pope Francis says that this earth, our sister and mother, is crying out for our attention, crying out for relief, crying out because she is being victimized by the human family. We human beings have been exploiting the earth. And he says at one point in the introduction, in the opening, that the planet, this planet Earth, our sister and mother, is really counted among the poorest of the poor in our universe, in this world, because we just keep taking and taking and taking with absolutely no regard for the Earth's dignity, for the care that's owed it. It cries out and is counted among the poor. Very strong, very indicting language. He then situates the encyclical within the broader history of Catholic social teaching, particularly within the last century. He begins by looking at Pope John the 23rd, now St. John the 23rd, the same Pope who called the Second Vatican Council. He points to, that is Pope Francis, points to John the 23rd's encyclical letter Pacem in Terris, which means peace on earth. And this text was released in 1963. It was a teaching that addressed violence, addressed the issue of the Cold War and the increase of nuclear weapons in this world and the threat that that posed to our safety. And one of the things that's very interesting about that encyclical letter is that unlike all the texts that have come previously from other popes, other official teaching of the Church, Pope John the 23rd addressed this encyclical not just to Catholics, not just to Christians, but he said to people of goodwill, to all people of goodwill. We should all be concerned about this global crisis of violence and of really atomic annihilation. Now, one of the reasons that Pope Francis points to this encyclical is to draw from John the 23rd this idea that an encyclical teaching, this letter that's meant to be authoritative for Catholic Christians, shouldn't just be limited to Catholics, but rather is addressed not just to the Christian community, those brothers and sisters of ours who are also baptized, not just to people of goodwill, as Pope John the 23rd put it, but rather to all people. In fact, that's why Pope Francis uses in the title of the encyclical, Care for Our Common Home. And he says that this teaching, this letter, is addressed to all people who share this common home. That means everybody. There isn't a person on this earth, a person who has lived or will come after us, it seems, who will not share this common home. So that's a very important thing to take note of, that this is not just for Catholics. Pope Francis is trying to engage in dialogue with people who have different faiths, people who espouse no faith whatsoever, people who recognize Christianity, Jesus Christ, as God, those of other religious traditions. It is to include everybody. No one is excluded from the audience in this case. Pope Francis then points to his predecessors. Following John the 23rd, he points out Blessed Pope Paul VI and John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and he identifies some of the ways in which each of these popes, in their own teaching and in their own writing, have also focused on care for creation, have focused on environmental concerns. In other words, what Pope Francis is doing in naming his predecessors, pointing out particular documents here and there along the way over the last century, especially over the last 50 years, what Pope Francis is doing is saying that what I am about to teach and what I am placing here in this authoritative text, which sits among all the other documents and teachings of the social tradition in the Church, that this is in continuity with what has come before. I'm not doing something new. This isn't radical in a novel sense, but radical in the true sense, meaning going back to the roots of our tradition, going back to the roots of Christian understanding of creation. Now, one of the other interesting things he does, in addition to naming these popes who have come before him and who have taught about creation and care for creation in their own way, is point out Patriarch Bartholomew, the ecumenical patriarch, who, this is sort of a reach out and an olive branch of sorts to our Eastern brothers and sisters, the Orthodox Church, and to celebrate the good work that Patriarch Bartholomew has done over the decades. He has been somebody who has been especially vocal about the need that we have to care for creation. In fact, he is the one who most stridently has said that our harming of the earth, our pollution, our overuse of resources, our decimation of forests and destruction of waterways and mountains and landscapes, the extinction of animals and their endangerment, these things are not just bad in some sort of practical or instrumental way. These things are in fact ecological sin. He calls them out by name as being sinful. And Pope Francis here says, I see what Patriarch Bartholomew has done. I echo what he's saying. We are brothers together expressing this need that we have to be more concerned about our sister, our mother, the earth, and all that share this common home, human and other than human alike. As I've mentioned, he then goes on to reiterate his own audience, pointing back to John the 23rd, but also pointing forward to say that this is for all people who inhabit this planet. He then points out something that's very interesting, and something that's really difficult and challenging in some ways, and that's we are all responsible. In addition to the fact this is addressed to all of us, we all have a responsibility in responding to this call and returning to the sources and recognizing what it is that God has entrusted us with. Again, this language of stewardship that makes an appearance. He says that, yeah, there are some people who have, in explicit ways, we might say, committed this ecological sin that Patriarch Bartholomew talks about. In other words, those who are directly or proximately responsible for pollution or for overuse or overconsumption, for all the practices that lead to these devastating effects and ecological crises. He says, but it's not just people who go out there and rev their engines and pollute waterways. He says it's also the responsibility and call for us, all of us, to acknowledge our own complicity in different ways. And one of the themes that he will repeat throughout the encyclical, and it's been something that's been a keystone of his teaching, from his daily homilies to his audiences and public lectures and so on, in terms of the traveling that he's done and interviews that he's given, is this idea that we are culpable for our indifference, that we can't just sit by and let things continue as they are, that there is, as we say and profess every Sunday in confessing our sins, we are responsible not just for the things that we have done, but for the things that we have failed to do. And in a way, Pope Francis is calling all of us who are willfully ignorant, who desire not to be concerned about issues with the environment or with other creatures, the way that we care for the earth or don't care for it. He says that is not acceptable, and that there is responsibility that's needed here, and we are all in some way complicit. That's really important. And it leads to his primary call or move toward conversion, and that's toward a new solidarity. Later on, he'll talk about solidarity not just with those who suffer the most immediate consequences of environmental crises, not just solidarity with our other than human fellow creatures, animals and plants and those that inhabit this common home as well, but solidarity with future generations. He'll talk about an intergenerational solidarity, that we need to begin to think about what we're leaving or what we aren't leaving for those people who have yet to be born, those that we believe we're connected to in terms of the communion of saints, those who are going to come after us. So for the time being, what he does in this opening section, this very brief prefatory introduction, is just lay out these themes, emphasizing the need that we have to acknowledge our own complicity and sinfulness, our culpability for our indifference, if not for our active sinning against creation, and this need that all of us have, and indeed all of us, all who share this common home, to convert, to turn in the spirit of metanoia, the Greek for turning, which it becomes in Latin this word conversio, to turn around, for us to turn around and move away from our own selfishness and our own self-centeredness, our own immediate gratification, toward a solidarity with those who suffer the most today, to those who are not necessarily part of the human family, but also inhabit our common home, and for those who are yet to be born, yet to come, the future generations that will share this home with us, even if we don't share it in the same time. So stay tuned for more as we go more deeply into the encyclical Laudato Si. May the Lord give you peace.